Okay, thanks for showing up, everybody. So my name is Alan Edwards, and I'm a professor in the medicine side of campus. And in my day job, I head up a large multinational consortium in drug discovery and making new medicines. And I'd like to speak to you today about the role of intellectual property, patenting, in how to move ideas from your heads into the marketplace. And we have I've never done this top hat thing before, so evidently there's 3 questions. Go. It's very exciting for me. Oh, question 1. So, as you guys get older and start to pay taxes and stuff, you're going to be wondering where your taxpayers' dollars go. And so the Canadian government invests them for you. And so they want to invest in new companies and want to create a vibrant economy, okay? And so they invest in universities because we are the generators of ideas and ostensibly part of this innovation system and generate patents and spin-offs and blah, blah, blah. And, obviously when you have a patent and you license it to somebody, they're going to pay you for it. So how much did all the universities in the entire country make in 2010 profit from their patenting activities? And as a hint, we spend $10 billion of research in the research labs that the professors have all over University of Toronto and all the universities in Canada. $10 billion in research funding to the professors to generate ideas and new things. How much money did we make? How long do I wait till the next one?
We sometimes wait till
Oh, I see. Oh, this is cool. It's like a running total. Come on, there's 22 people who haven't answered. You having trouble finding your buttons? Can I go to the next one? Or wait? 33. All right. Are people watching at home? There's not 260 people there. Okay, we're going to stop in 10 seconds. I don't know how to do this. 10 seconds. Okay. We're going to go to the next one. Oh. Oh, so now what happens? Oh, cool. The answer is D. Okay, next one, please. Oh. So now what? Yeah. So now I want you to think about, you're an inventor, and you've decided to patent your invention, and you've decided to exert your patent in the jurisdictions that have the largest markets, because of course you want to protect your idea in the largest markets. How much does it cost you over the life of that patent just to file the patent, get it translated, and keep it active over the course of the patent in all the jurisdictions combined? How much does a patent cost you just to have a patent, is the question. Okay, we'll give you another 10 seconds. Okay, let's go. Yeah, well, I'm a D kind of a guy. And the next. And that was for a simple patent, a short one. And so I sent out an article from The Economist, which is a leading magazine, I would say, written out of England. And it's a sort of central left-leaning magazine on just global affairs and the economy. And last summer they had a story that I sent you the PDF. And so they have issues with the patent system. And so which is not a key issue? Okay, 10. Yeah. Well, that was better. Okay. Thanks. That's it. So now I'm going to give you a little bit about fake news. And so I think you guys are embarking on your careers, as it were, and you need to obviously learn how to think for yourselves. And so probably the first thing you're doing is thinking there's a guy up here talking in shorts. He can't be a business person. He must be a hippie. Well, you got to watch out, right, for what you see and what you hear, and have critical thinking. And don't be fooled by what you see, okay? And so we're going to talk about this patent system that's been, you sort of have inherent beliefs, I would imagine, already. And we're going to go look at some evidence in the course of this talk. And you can start to read the newspapers when they're talking about innovation, which is a huge issue in Canada now, right? And think about how you are going to sort of think about how you're going to play a role in this system. So, I mean, I thesis today, as a rich country and as smart young people, we should be trying to address the biggest problems we can. Interestingly, most problems are too complex, even the creation of a smartphone, be tackled by a single patent or a single idea. Almost everything today is a multiplex of ideas and culture and innovation and technology. And restricting access to individual ideas, as The Economist points out, actually limits the generation of new things, because, if you have two people, each with a patent, and you need to have chocolate and peanut butter them together to make the invention, and this person thinks his or her patent is worth $500, whatever the number is, and this one thinks their patent is worth $20, they'll never actually make the chocolate and peanut butter experiment, because they will disagree on the potential value of this, and nothing will happen. And that is what The Economist points out, that's what leading scholars point out, goes on far more today than it has ever had before, because the propagation of patents and no idea by itself has any value. And so this is part of the problem of why the system doesn't work. So you'll also be reading the newspapers, hopefully you guys still read, about sort of what's going on in Canada and what people argue in the press that's actually not true. So the first one is you'll hear professors who run research labs say there's not enough funding, we need more money for research in Canada. Well, that's not true. The Canadian government, believe it or not, is ranked #1 in funding university research of all the G7 countries, which is our main competitors in the economic world. So #1, when you hear professors complain about no funding, tell them to grow up. #2, Canadian industries are less innovative than industries in other countries. Well, if you measure by patenting activity, which is a reflection of new ideas, that's not true, and I'll show you that. Patents do not have much impact on the productivity. That's true. So if you say, I'll show you data that we patent a lot, and the Canadian economy is among the least productive of all the developed nations. And productivity in economic terms mean how many hours do you need to work to make certain product or certain amount of money. So Canadians work more hours than most countries to achieve the same economic outputs. We're ranked 27th, I'll show you. And the net income to U of T from patents is almost zero, maybe even negative, okay? So let's go to the evidence that Canada, we don't have pointers, do we? The evidence that Canada is competitive. So this is the OECD. This is an independent think tank that looks at economic and development issues. It's a trusted sort of third party that looks around the world at all the countries' economies, measures things that we report. And so OECD contains all the European countries, North American countries, Japan. And you can see that in the OECD, compared to the average, Canada, the dots, public expenditure per gross domestic product, we are above average. We have more top universities, and we have more publications. We're doing pretty darn well in terms of basic research. In fact, as I said before, here's a ranking of the countries in how much money they spend at universities on R&D, and you can see Canada's #5, but our government doesn't really care about Netherlands and Finland and Denmark, podunk little countries. We care about, United States and Japan and Germany. And among those countries, we're #1 investors in university research. Okay, the generator of the ideas, evidently, that will be patented and turn into vibrant young companies, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Another thing is that our industry, although they patent a lot, they invest very little in research. And if you talk to the government of Canada, and if you look around, what you'll find out is the companies in Canada, compared to companies in America or in other countries, invest very little in research, okay? So if you can do one thing when you get out into the real world, tell the companies, we're not doing so well, you gotta put more into long-term research. And this is one of the reasons that the Canadian economy is less productive. Our companies do not invest in research and in futuristic stuff. Okay, and here's the ranking. You can see Canada near the bottom there. Okay, this is productivity. Gross domestic product per hour worked. Okay, look at us. Okay, and so you guys are going to work longer hours to make as much money or make as much economic impact as a class like this sitting in Nebraska. Yet, despite these pitiful numbers on the business side of our economy, we're pretty good in patenting. So in some fields, we're the 9th in the world. So how does this, what's the disconnect? All of a sudden, I'm saying we're not investing in research. Our universities aren't making money, but we patent like crazy, and we're 27th in the world in our economic productivity. So those are the facts, right? And in fact, this is consistent with all the research that the scholars who study economies and study innovation think, okay? So the intellectual property rights from the human genome, this is done by a professor. She's now at MIT. And she said, how are we going to show in a good experiment that patenting does or does not work? And she had the brilliant idea of looking at the human genome. Remember, we're all made up of the same DNA, as it were. We all have the same number of genes. And when they were being discovered in the 90s, some company said, wow, if I patent this gene, maybe I'll make a lot of money on it. So companies grew up to patent parts of the human DNA. And then the public sector said, that's not right. We can't have companies owning our genomes. We'll start paying money to do the genome project in the open. And there was a big competition in the 90s. And what happened in the 90s, what you had, some human genes that were patented and some human genes that weren't patented, thousands. And so what Heidi did was, here's a great experiment. Let's look at the human genes that were patented, and in the decade following, look at the economic activity from those genes, and then the other set of genes that were never patented, that were put into the public domain, and anyone can use them, and you don't have to pay, just go ahead. And there was 30% more economic activity from the large number of genes that had never been patented than there were over the genes that had been patented. And you know why? I just told you before, is the people who had the patent on the gene thought the value of it was this much, and the people who wanted to use the gene thought it was this much, and they could never come to a business arrangement to be able to use that information, so it just sat there doing nothing. Not doing nothing, remember what it's costing the company to keep that patent alive, right? So all the time they're paying money, cha-ching, 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 and nobody's using the patent, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Society's not benefiting, no one's benefiting, but on the other side, the public sector put the gene into the public domain. 10 companies could use that information without worrying about paying anything, and they can all have their own ideas, and they can all generate products and things from it. And that's actually what happened. That's what the data say. So, and here's a quote, across a range of specifications, RIP led to the order, subsequent R&D of 20 to 30%. So there's short-term IP at persistent negative effects. Interestingly, look what she says here, short-term. When they patented it, they realized this is going to cost us a lot of money. So then they let the patent lag. So these genes were only patented for like a year or two, and then they said, wow, $400,000 a year to keep it? No, I'm going to, right? And so it's super interesting, this sort of knock-on effects of trying to stop the flow of information. Okay? So this is, I think, a really important point. There is no empirical evidence that they serve to increase innovation and productivity unless productivity is measured by the number of patents, which, as evidence shows, has no correlation with productivity. Both theory and evidence suggest that while patents can have a partial equilibrium effect of improving incentives, the general effect on the whole innovation system can be negative. And so this was a system invented in Florence in the 1400s, right? It's not relevant today because so many inventions and practical things require lots of people to talk to one another, and patents are barriers to that. So this is the numbers I showed you about before. So if you have an invention, you think, oh, where am I going to file this? Well, there's an international patent treaty that allows you to file a PCT, which keeps your idea open for 2 years, and before you need to make the decision, which country am I going to file in, okay? So that's relatively cheap. But as soon as that 2 years is up, and you want to keep that patent alive, now you have to file in each country. And so you wrote your patent in English, and you spent money on a lawyer now, because you're going to spend about $20,000. To translate it into Japanese is going to cost you another $10,000. To maintain the patent in Japan, for example, another X $5,000 per year. And then that's just Japan. Now you got to go through all the countries, and you start adding it up, and over the course of a 20-year, you're going to have a $400,000 bill. And that's for a simple patent, right, of 30 pages. Big, long patents, obviously the translation's going to be more claims, more money. Okay, so it's not a sort of, oh, let's just file a patent and then, I have it. No, you got to actively pay to keep these things active. So there's the Economist article that I told you about. I really recommend you read it. And mostly it's because you need to think. Just like I said, you have some pre-assigned assumptions probably about, somebody stands up here like that. You're probably going to be told over and over again over the course of your here at the university about how patents have an important play, how to patent, how to file a patent, what's an invention, what's not. Well, think about it. I mean, this, right? Why am I doing that, right? Is there another way? So, although patents, the evidence shows, remember we're evidence-based now, not fake news, the evidence shows that patents have no long-term impact on the economy. Yet, the Canadian government, Globe and Mail editorials, even in the last few months, talk about the importance of Canada's being a robust patenter. We're already number 9, remember? Okay? And so let's look at the numbers. Again, let's go at evidence-based tech transfer. So what happens, we're a professor and we got an invention and we go to the university, say, let's patent it, we patent it, and we try and then get somebody to buy it, okay? And the process, that is called technology transfer. And the university has an office that's dedicated to doing exactly that, helping a professor write the patent, helping find somebody to buy it, okay? Every university in Canada has one of these things, okay? And then we license, we get money for licensing those inventions. Well, in 2010, the entire country on a $10 billion budget made $57 million, right? Remember, $2 million was I told you before. And that's because it cost $55 million to run these offices. And so we have a net profit, shall we say, to the university of $2 million on a $10 billion budget. That really sucks. Moreover, the government has set up at universities, they say, oh, we're not doing tech transfer well, let's put technology transfer innovation blah blahs in there. And they spend another $250 million paying people to even try and double down on technology transfer. So now the numbers are starting to look pitiful, right? Because now you have a $2 million and on your negative ledger, $250 million, right? And in addition to that, if I invent something in my lab, let's pretend I invent this little widget, or it's a thing in my biology lab, and I want to send it to my friend at the University of Victoria, well, this actually, when I sign my contract to work at the university, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the university. And if I send it to my friend at the University of Victoria, it's not her that's getting it, it's their university. And there has to be a legal agreement, believe it or not, for this valueless thing. There has to be an agreement that says, this belongs to the University of Toronto. If you invent anything, I own your firstborn, I own you this, that. Okay? And so now we have lawyers talking for me transferring something that's worth nothing and will never be worth anything. But the university says, well, just in case. Maybe it's the Willy Wonka golden ticket, right? Maybe it's the one, right? And so that process, on average, takes a month for transferring something of no value to my friend to do an experiment in Victoria. A month. The University of Toronto alone does 1,000 of these per year. That's 1,000 months wasted. That's about 100 years wasted. If you're in industry and you say, how much does a person cost for a company? $200,000 a year is how much every company is going to hire a person. They think, I'm going to be paying $200,000 for increased rent, health care, salary, blah, 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 blah. $200,000, 100 years, 100 people. That's $20 million in wasted time transferring something worth nothing to another university. Okay? So put that on the negative side of ownership. Then the only reason you want to own this is because you think it's of value, right? So the universities are losing money hand over fist over the promise of thinking they're going to get rich on these inventions. And remember, our economy's not doing so well. It's not as if everything's rosy with the system. And U of T is no different. So University of Toronto is actually a big business, right? It's a $2.5 billion a year enterprise. All the salaries and the buildings and the electricity. And of that $2.5 billion, $1.2 billion of that is funding to research labs to do experiments. If you walk through the halls, you look in, you'll see, students and professors doing experiments. Well, all over campus in the medical school and the engineering school, about $1.2 billion is spent on research every year at the University of Toronto. It's one of the 4th largest in North America. Of that $1.1 billion, most of it comes from the government. Only $87 million comes from industry, right? And we're trying to create universities as mediators of getting ideas into industry. Very little of us actually talk to industry. And the research income to the university campus is 25 million, and the research income from licensing, so of the industry, most of that goes to the hospitals. So you think engineers should be talking to industry a lot. Well, in fact, not. Only $25 million a year out of a $1.2 billion budget comes from industry to the University of Toronto campus, the botanists, the engineers, etc. That's a really low number, right? We're not having a big impact. And licensing impact, $9 million. Okay, 1.2 billion, and all our patenting and licensing is 9 million. It's not so good. So let's look. Patenting does not drive economic growth. There's no correlation. The Canadian University focus on patents, protecting and facilitating and helping get our ideas out. It's not really having much of an impact. And we spend proportionally very little time, because we all think like that. Oh, how do you start a company? You have an invention, you patent, you raise venture capital, you have a startup, and you're hip and drinking lattes and stuff. So that's not working, right? So couldn't we think differently about how to get your ideas into an impact all around the world? So I'm going to argue that sharing our knowledge is the best way to have an economic impact. And so as you sort of hear about this and read about it, you're going to hear a bunch of words. So open innovation is the first word. And that was, if you were at, let's take the idea is, if you were at Ford maybe 20 years ago, or GM, and you're working on a design, or Bombardier, everything that you invented, everything that Bombardier used would be invented in the walls of Bombardier, or Ford, or GM. They thought, we can invest internally in research, we don't need anybody else. If we allow any of our ideas to get out of Ford or Bombardier, it's a bad thing. We got to keep it secret, that's our competitive advantage. Well then, as companies realized, as Bill Joy said, the smartest people always work for somebody else. He was the founder of Sun Microsystems. He said, okay, we need to develop a mechanism to talk to these. So they coined the term open innovation, which really means that, let's say, Bombardier would start to collaborate with another company. They would share ideas between them, although the ideas would still be around, there would be a sort of wall of intellectual property around the collaboration. So it's from Bombardier's walls to another company opening up their ideas, okay? It's not really open, peace and love and flower children, but it's still better than it was before. Then you also have another sort of movement, I would say, and it's mostly called open access. And so this is really a travesty, and it's unacceptable. So what happens is that the Canadian government spends $1 billion a year at the University of Toronto, and we're, as I said, you go to all the professors to do an experiment. How do we tell the world about these experiments? We publish in journals. But the journals are privately owned. And you have to pay to get access to the journals. Sometimes if you ever had to read a paper, and you'll see you have to pay $3.99 to get the PDF. Public money is being spent to put science into the public domain, and we have to pay for the science that we did. Now, we're a wealthy country, so the University of Toronto, we were talking before, has a great library system. You can get it. But what happens if you lived in Kenya? Or what happens if you lived in other places, right? It's unconscionable that we allow this to happen. And so now the funders who are funding this research say, that's just plain wrong. And so there's an enormous movement, both from the funders and from citizens, as it were, to try and get the knowledge from our science experiments into the public domain, and they call that open access, okay? It refers to the literature, but it may or may not patent materials, but allow communities to take restriction. So often if you patent, right, you allow the community to use it. Like, for example, let me back up. It was poorly written up there. There's a genome project on cancer genomes, right? We get all the data from tumors from around the world. We sequence the DNA to find out what's different in the cancer cell in this. Currently, what the funders allow you to do is to keep that secret for 6 months, because you're the one doing the experiment, and then after, you allow the world to use it. It's not quite the best scenario, but at least it's open. Before, Like 20 years ago, for a doctor, you went into the doctor and you gave a blood sample. As soon as you pass that blood sample to the hospital, it's their property, not you anymore. It's yours, but not anymore. And then they can publish on your sample and not let you see it. And they can publish in the literature and not let you have it. And it's still today. As soon as all of you go to the hospital, right today, and you give a chunk of your flesh to the hospital, they own it. Isn't that weird? It's repugnant, really, but that's what happens. So there's a lot of people trying to change it. That's just not right. Your genetic DNA, your sequence, when it goes to hospitals, they own it. The professor won't share it, right? You want to help cure disease, and the professor's thinking, I'm going to help cure build my cottage, right? I'll be able to get more papers, I'll get more famous. So this is the world that's going on, and this is what we're trying to change with open access. The last thing, as you've heard, is open source. And this is, of course, if you write code, you let everybody use it. In our world, it's a little more difficult because code you can do in your garage. Doing a biological experiment costs $1 million. So there's a little bit, so what we believe anyway, is a little bit more difficult collecting our information, and therefore people believe, not me, people believe that they should have the right to keep it for a while because they spent all their money. But they spent the public money, right? So open source is the sort of the new way of going forward. So remember when you hear about open science, open access, there's gradations of it. Open innovation still allows you to patent, but you're patenting between companies, right? Open access means the world can access the knowledge, right? Open source is sharing everything. So I'm going to give you like 3 slides on what I do as an example of what you can do. So I run a consortium that's funded by 6 governments: Canada, Sweden, Germany, the EU, Britain, and Brazil. 8 companies, and we never file patents. Okay, it's about 300 people all around the world. And so why did we do this? Why did we want to talk to industry? Pharmaceutical companies, right? Those evil pharmaceutical companies have given us about $200 million to not patent stuff. Put things in the public domain, right? Because they realize this is the best way they can get new ideas. So what's the big problem we all want to solve? Remember I said at the beginning, if you start your lives, choose a problem, right? And the problem, we said, we spend $250 billion around the world on medical research, and we have no new medicines for schizophrenia for 50, 60 years, 1% of the population. Alzheimer's, we don't even know how it works. Parkinson's was first described in 1808. You know Parkinson's disease? We still don't know what it works. 200 years pouring money into labs all around the world, and if you go to a doctor, what causes Parkinson's disease? Don't know, right? We've got some genes that are involved, but I really don't know. So how are you going to cure it if you don't know, right? And that's what he says or she says. So the other problem is that because we have this system to make medicines that's so pitifully ineffective, you have to charge a lot for the medicines because we fail a lot. Most people on the planet can't get access to them, and that's wrong. And then you say, okay, well maybe the industry's doing so well, but no. In fact, the productivity of the pharmaceutical sector has been dropping consistently for 30 years. It costs more and more and more to make one medicine than it does 10 years ago, and that's despite all these technology widgets and apps and all sorts of stuff. It's just not working so well. And the big problem is we don't understand biology. So what we decided, said, you know, this is a problem that's important for industry. They're not getting productive. It's important for society, and it's in an area of science that we don't know well, so why don't we just collaborate on the knowledge generation and agree up front? We're not going to patent anything. We're going to put it in the public domain. All the lawyers can go home, and we can just focus on science. And remember, I'm talking about the pharmaceutical industry. So if you read, you know, the newspapers, you think, these are the most evil, non-sharing, right? But they appreciate that this is a problem that they can't solve. And so what we did is we created a partnership with them where we do our science, which is on the left. We create all these reagents. Remember that thing I transferred to Victoria? We just give them away, right? We don't have any lawyers in the way. Anyone in the world can use them. And then we put the knowledge into the public domain, and then people will publish all around the world, and then we learn more about life, and we learn more about disease, and we get better at making medicines. That's the idea. We've been doing it for a long time now. And so here's just one example of how patenting and non-patenting can help. This is a story in which GlaxoSmithKline, one of the largest companies in the world, told us that, hey, there's this Mitsubishi idea and we think it's a good one. You should work on it. Okay. We started to collaborate with Harvard, and we told Harvard, so we have a lab at Oxford, and we told Harvard, you may not patent. It took them a while, but we got them to agree, and we started to collaborate on an idea that let's make a drug-like molecule to put into the public domain. So that's the molecule right there, that chemical structure, and we published it in a journal. We said, hey, everybody, you can have this molecule. And we gave it away to everybody without those lawyer agreements. We just said, go use it and use the molecule and see if it kills cancer cells or kills stuff. We don't know what it's going to do, but go for it. Most people would have patented it. We didn't. We gave it away. And then other people started to use our molecule and say, you know what? I added that molecule to multiple myeloma, MM, down here, amyloid leukemia cells, and they died. This is really cool. This means that whatever the drug is doing, and we know what gene it what protein it talks to, this means that it could be a cancer thing. So then other companies started to join us, and they started putting their own molecules in. And GlaxoSmithKline, who had not worked on this because they had tried internally, didn't have any good ideas, said, we thought it was a drug for inflammation. It's a cancer drug. And so they started to carry out the experiments in cancer patients in 2012, 2 years after our initial report. Compare that to the patent world, where Gleevec, which is, you heard personalized medicine, maybe it's the poster child. It took 6 years from the exact same time point to the end. And 2 years of that 6 years were failed negotiations between the pharmaceutical company and Harvard. And it was the remember idea before, we've got an invention, we think it's worth this much. No, it's worth this much. Fight 2 years. 2 years. It turns out Gleevec is a good drug, so that's 2 years in essence of people dying because they couldn't agree on the terms, the financial terms of a medicine, okay? So here's an interesting example where we took the result where everyone else would have patented, we put it into the public domain, people used it around the world, made cool inventions, and then the company that had originally told us about it benefited, right? There's no straight line, they just benefited because of the knowledge. And then other companies joined, and there are now, this is how many clinical trials are ongoing, other companies said, wow, that's cool. I can do that too, and I can do that too. And they're all competing in the market. It's about now a $4 billion market, all created by our willingness to put an idea into the public domain without restriction, okay? So is it generalizable? I would argue yes, and think of it as engineers, right? All sectors, aerospace, environmental remediation, chemistry, they all have challenges that all the industry has, and nobody wants to solve it themselves because it'll cost too much for one company to solve. And all industries are looking for ways to get more efficient research. And interestingly, for people at universities or students, these kind of problems that these industries have are ones that we want to solve too, because societal problems, obviously the big problems, have societal impact and industry impact. So it's a nice way to put them together. So here's some examples. So let's pretend in Canada we have an oil and mining sector, right? And they get money from selling their minerals or from their oil. They don't make money from cleaning up what they did, right? But they have to clean up what they did to make regulations. So, but every dollar they spend on cleaning up is a dollar from the profit. And so they want to spend as least money as possible on cleaning up and as most money making money. And so the idea is that, does every company have to invest in all the ideas and technology to clean up? Not really, right? Because that's just taken away from their profit. So what happens if you created a group, a consortium of thinkers like you, and said, every company's going to put one, instead of spending $10 inside my company, I'm going to put one into the pot. All the other companies put it into the pot. Now I got $15 in the pot. I'm going to get $15 of research for one, and the only agreement is I get to share all that, and I get to take anything, right? And so if you create a zone where everyone can collaborate sharing like this, you get far more effective use of dollars and public dollars on that as well. You can think about, sustainable development of cities. Developers, people who want to build on the waterfront, they're going to build towers. What are the environmental laws now? What are they going to be like in 5 years? How do I figure that out? I'm a company, I don't do that. But imagine if you formed an open partnership with universities and urban planning offices and say, everything in this we're sharing, then they can get an idea of how to design their buildings to meet the environmental codes in 5 years, in 10 years, without reacting to it. These forums for professors and students and cities and industry to interact are so much simpler if you can create a zone where you say the knowledge should be shared. And why is this not happening? Well, I think I've said this before. I mean, universities, professors have competing interests, right? Tenure, how we get promotion. It's mostly cultural change, right? So I'm not going to go through this, but I'm going to just tell you, it's cultural problems, really. It's how we reward ourselves. It's when you look at people like me, you have a predefined idea of what to expect. So you guys have to really think about, don't take what's illogical as the truth, right? You have to think about how you can make it better and not listen to old farts like us. I'm going to skip that. And then in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you about a really brave experiment being done at McGill University. And this is a hospital called the Montreal Neurological Institute, where Professor Edwards' father used to work. And it is one of the most storied research hospitals in neurology in the world. And they're treating patients with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, with Parkinson's, and they know we've not changed our treatment in 30 years. It's not working what we're doing. And so they said, so that's the neuro. It's founded by Penfield. It's world leading. And it's got some interesting characteristics, and this is their sort of promo blurb, right? It's got genes to cells to patients. It's internationally recognized. It's got data. It's got samples. And it's got competitive funding. So here's one of the world-leading hospitals, and it says, how are we going to get our ideas into the public domain faster? And so it decided to go all in on open. It decided to share the patient samples. It decided to share the genetic information. It decided not to patent anything. It decided to work with industry in the open. And it's going to do this for a 5-year period as an experiment in uber open, as it were, right? Just to see whether this kind of position by a university can have a greater impact on society, okay? And I think you should watch this space, as it were, to try and find out, you know, if you can, this provides evidence, as it were, on the ongoing basis that this is the way that we, as citizens, can help. Okay, so I'm good. That was going to be my last slide. So I think what I've tried to convince you today is don't believe what you see, right? Don't believe what you read. Follow the evidence. There's a lot of fake news in the innovation space, and you got to have to be sort of consider that. I've also told you that there are some brave experiments going on around the world to try and see if sharing knowledge can help, not only help society, but help industry, which is really important, okay? And you do have to think about your competitive advantage when you're inventing something, but there's many ways to get value in quotation marks, including economic value from your ideas. Now, I had one question here. How can you avoid the problem with the collective action where someone can just not agree to the open and patent? So can somebody patent something and exclude you from doing something? They could try, but the idea is, as an inventor, there are very few patents out there that you can't, they call it workaround, right? So if you think of any whiz-bang invention, the smartphone, why isn't there's only one company that makes smartphones? You'd imagine if they patented it. No, you can find ways around it, because when you patent something, your claims have to be rather narrow. So this is, I think my invention could do this, this, this. You think about it for 10 minutes, you think, I can think of a different way to do that. So especially in the IT space where ideas come like this. And so yes, people can patent, and while they're patenting and spending that, you know, $400,000 eventually to state it, you just work around and have a new idea, and you pass them in a second. And then you think, well, that's a good idea, I'll patent that, and then someone thinks of another idea. And so the world, in terms of the space in which inventions happen so quickly. And then if you make an invention and the patent person's trying to charge $5,000 for their patent. You invent a workaround and charge nothing. Guess who they're going to work with, right? So I'm not saying that patenting can make it a problem because it makes you think, oh crap, now I got to do a workaround, right? And then you make the decision, should I license the patent or work around? And the guy's charging $10,000 for the patent. You think, screw that, I'm going to work around, right? And so I think the answer, it's a great question. Patenting can cause barriers, but there's ways around it. And in the total ecosystem, obviously the ways around it are a more effective way of getting ideas into products. Thank you. Do you guys take questions or no, right? Okay. I had a question by internet. That's cool. Never had that before. That's innovation. I think that's it. Thank you.